The WNBA finally has figured out a new CBA. They have worked through, again, as we have somewhat talked about, though, over 100 hours, 8+ days of work. But we have finally, though, seen the new deal signed. We're still waiting for some more numbers to come out, though. But we have one of the best in the business, though, Nick, to talk all things about the WNBA, March Madness, and, of course, the new CBA deal. A good friend of yours truly and a friend of the program, the one, the only, Jordan Robinson joins us this morning here on ETB/early afternoon. Jordan, great to see you. It's been quite a while for us to get back linked up here. But as always, though, Jordan, thanks for the time today to talk all things women's hoops. And more importantly, congrats on the new book coming out, by the way, too. How you doing today?
Thank you so much. It's so excited to see you. It has been forever, it feels like. But thank you for having me on. A lot to talk about.
So I guess we'll get underway right with the CBA. So what were your original thoughts of seeing the CBA or historic deal that they're talking about with the CBA?
Joy. That was my first emotion. Joy because we get a WNBA season, first of all.
Yes.
I was getting a little nervous, but I was willing to be okay with not having a WNBA season if that meant the players weren't getting what they deserved. And now as the numbers keep overflowing and the dollar signs and the amounts that we're seeing, I couldn't be more proud of these players that they held firm and they stuck to what they believed in, and they deserve this. So joy all around.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan, I couldn't agree more. Obviously, with where where we've gone, because Nick and I had really covered this whole story from the night that Nafisa Collier, called out the commissioner's office after the injury she sustained against the Mercury in the league conference final, all the way along the lines of the finals. Nick and I talked about how the fan reaction to Cathy in real time after the Aces won the championship. Regarding, ESPN trying to blur out people flipping off the commissioner and turning down the crowd mics and stuff. Jordan, your overall thoughts, I guess, though, about how this whole thing played out, because, I know we know it got very ugly a couple times.
Mhm.
As the process goes on, we're led to believe about negotiating tactics where, one side says this, one side says that, though. But Jordan, how do you probably look back, though, at the last several months about the framework being, laid out, all the barbs being exchanged, though, but finally that they got something done finally within the last week?
Yeah, this was a journey, right? This was a marathon of getting here. And I know this is me from the outside. I've not been in those negotiation rooms. I know that these players and on the league side, they have been going back and forth. But this has been a 17-month long battle. We have to remember they opted out in October 2024. So this has been strategic by the players union to continue to show momentum and show a united front throughout the WNBA season, being able to speak on different things, the executive committee using times appropriately to say things to make sure it was on top of people's minds, that they were always thinking about this CBA and this deal even while the season was going on. So with everything that happened with Nafisa calling out the commissioner Cathy Engelbert, quoting her on things that they had said in private, it was wild. I remember waking up to that news and being like, oh, it's on. It was on before, but now it is really on. And all of those conversations that were happening in private that we weren't privy to, now we were all thrusted into it. And they made it very public, which I think was on purpose. It was to make sure that people continued to understand that this was a real thing. Now, to your point about what it kind of turned into, it did get ugly. And what it constantly told me was that this is a labor negotiation. Yes, we are fans of a league, but it was very much a employee and an employer going at what they felt was right and fair. And I have been a part of a unionizing within my job. Like, it's not pretty. It gets ugly, and money is involved, and it gets weird and awkward and all of those things. And I think what it got to in the later days was like, oh yeah, they're writing their paychecks. Like, they are demanding more money and they deserve that. It's not just this, yay, hurrah, we're fans, we can't wait to see them on the court. They have a livelihood that they needed to protect, and that's what they went out and got. And so to be able to see what they were able to settle on and sign for is incredible. So super proud of them.
So one thing that stood out was Natasha Cloud and her statement.
Mhm.
And what was surprising to Callan and I was the NDAs when we heard her talking about the NDAs and seeing that whole situation that she couldn't really talk and talking about like the pie and the percentage. What did you make of her revealing about the NDAs and talking about that like publicly that way?
I love Natasha Cloud. I know her well. I've worked with her so many times, and she is going to stay true to herself. I'll just say that. She is always going to be Tosh. And one thing that I think a lot of people who may be on the outside kind of looking in, this is very common for WNBA players. They are not going to sit down and twiddle their thumbs and make sure that they are picture perfect for forward facing things. The league has always been progressive, outspoken. We can go back throughout history, which thank you, Callan. You can plug Court Queens, my book. We have all of those moments throughout history where WNBA players were able to flip Senate seats. They were able to, stand tall and say, we're not going to play a game until there's actual movement happening on a Black Lives Matter front. We're going to kneel for the national anthem. WNBA players did that before Colin Kaepernick did it. So this idea that WNBA players are outspoken, Natasha Cloud fits right into that box. And she was just making it known that we're not just going to stay silent and we're not going to let the league kind of be able to paint the picture that they want to keep painting. I'm going to make sure to keep it real so you guys know exactly where we're coming from. And I always respect her for that.
Yeah, and we appreciate what Cloud said. We shared a TikTok of her from her from her car talking about we wanted this, the league wanted us to have this, and then she said but we had to sign an NDA just so everyone knows out there. Nick and I were floored. Like I've never heard a league ever say that you got to sign your life away with an NDA to not talk about things. But Jordan, as you had mentioned, though, we see the book behind you, by the way, the recent book that you had just written, though, called Queens of Court Queens, which just came out last Tuesday, covers everything, going all the way back into the archives into the late 1890s to the modern day league. Jordan, why was it important, though, for you and your fellow writer, though, to highlight forgotten heroes who, played the game at a high level back then to where we're at now here in 2026, getting ready for the 30th year of the WNBA launching?
Yeah, so Court Queens is about that history because I just love how it came at a perfect moment. I swear we didn't plan it. We weren't in cahoots with the WNBPA saying, make sure to wait and sign the deal when Court Queens comes out. But it planned out so perfectly because this is such a historic CBA and the moment and going into the 30th anniversary of a WNBA, which is the longest women's professional sports league out there. And we wanted to make sure that everybody knew that the WNBA didn't just start a couple years ago. Like maybe your fandom started then, but there have been women that laid the groundwork to get to where we are today, to be able to have a monumental CBA. There needed to be leagues that started and failed. And we talked about that over and over, about these dreams and the ambitions of these women to be able to say, we want benefits. We want to have six figures. And what a dream it was to have. And it only lasted a couple years. So this excitement that is around the WNBA and women's basketball has been around, like you said, since the 1890s. And we wanted to just spotlight that and the women through these photos and through essays in this very overwhelming love letter to women's basketball that is Court Queens.
I mean, getting into more, you brought up like the 30th anniversary, and that's a big deal, and we're sure we're going to have it. I'm curious your thoughts on Cathy Engelbert, because Callan and I have talked a ton about Cathy Engelbert. A lot of, I don't know, anger towards Cathy Engelbert and the way she's run the league, how she handled herself in the negotiations. From her perspective, how do you think she did in these negotiations, and do you think that it was not handled properly from her point of view?
Oh, interesting. Well, I definitely cannot speak for the commissioner of the WNBA, but from my side and from, just from covering the league and when Cathy came on board in 2019, everyone was really excited because the WNBA hadn't had a commissioner before. Like, it felt
Right.
so much like the younger sister of the NBA, and the commissioner gave it, validity. It made it feel real and important. And we've had presidents before, or just people in power, but a commissioner felt very legit. And for her, first thing to do was the Wubble season, which I feel like she handled very well. And the WNBA was the first, professional league to really get started during COVID. She navigated that super well. And I think she got a lot of praise for that. But throughout the years, it had kind of, when you sign up for a commissioner role, you get to be praised for the bubble, but you also get to be the person that everyone points the fingers at when everything goes wrong. And
Thankless
things were
job.
yeah, that's the job. That is what you sign up for. And so right now, when everyone is chanting pay the players and booing the commissioner, which we know happens in the NFL all the time, and that is something that you do to commissioners, you boo them. It was kind of like that kind of, we're a real league now. Like, yes, we get to boo our commissioner. It's not all rah-rah and celebratory all the time in the WNBA. So that whole thing of being with the good and the bad, that's something that you have to roll with in this role. But after everything that went down with Nafisa, I personally saw her vanish. I saw very less statements from her. We're not getting direct quotes from her. They were like, okay, Cathy, let's fall back a little bit because it's hot. The block is hot right now. Let's fall back. So I'm predicting that we see a little bit more of that. I would love, and a couple people have pointed this out. Monica McNutt told me this on my podcast, and I love this idea of like a co-commissioner role where there is
Ooh.
someone who is a business side, and maybe that's Cathy, but there is a player first person, maybe a former player, and you are both commissioner and you are both working together to meet the needs. Because right now, that's what Nafisa was saying. Cathy, you don't understand our player experience. You don't talk to us like people. You don't talk to us like players. You are all about the business. And sometimes that can make us feel like you don't care about us. So if you can't do both, which is a lot, then you need to maybe split that role with someone. And I think NECA would be incredible once she retires, because how she has ran this presidency of the players union, she kills it. So I love that idea. I would vote to go that route in the future.
That would be something. I think, and
Yeah.
Christy Wilson, one of our viewers, even says a co-commissioner would be a pretty good idea. So Monica McNutt with maybe something for the next CBA 7 years down the
Yeah.
road in come 2034, 2035. Again, folks, Jordan Robinson joining us here today on Press Row on this Wednesday. Jordan, how about let's get into the nitty gritty a little bit, though, about the Women's Hoop Show. It's on Audacy stations around the country. I think I may have told you I woke up one morning, heard it down here on KWFN 97.3 The Fan, and I was like jumping for joy, being able to hear you again and stuff of that caliber. How has that been, though, for you going into doing a podcast role, but also, I mean, you got Cheryl Swoops as your co-host. Like, come on now. This is pretty amazing.
It is amazing. My life professionally is such a pinch me moment every single day that I get to do this. And to be able to, I recorded with Cheryl yesterday, and she was just, raving about the book because I sent her a copy, and I'm like, yeah, you're in it. Like, you are so much a part of women's basketball history. So thank you for loving it. And she's like, yeah, it just brought back so many memories of me breaking records. I'm like, I love that for you. So it's such a pinch me moment to be able to record with her, but also just going into something that I feel like the women's basketball fans really desired is a podcast in a place where their fandom can grow beyond just the games. And a lot of the time, if you were a women's basketball fan, the game would start and end, and then you would just have nothing. You wouldn't have a post-game show. You wouldn't have a pre-game show. Everybody would go to Twitter at the time and talk about it. But those conversations and the storylines deserve to be reverberated way after the horn sound. So that's what I try to do on the Women's Hoop Show. I try to tie in history as well, because I just love history so much with Hoop Roots. That's like a section of the show. and having a variety of co-hosts, Autumn Johnson, Kendra Andrews from ESPN, and we just get into it and we just yap, and it has been so much fun to do.
So I want to go back to draft night. Callan and I talk about this story all the time where Cathy came up to the stand and said basically that Unrivaled or Project B or any of these other leagues are not competition to the WNBA. What are your thoughts on that statement? And does this deal stop that competition? Does it fuel it? What do you think about those other leagues compared to the W?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So when I heard Cathy say that at the time, I laughed because it was
We
very
all
much
did. I wanted
like
to fall
a,
out. I wanted to fall out of my
yeah,
chair.
it was very funny, but also smart because she was like, yeah, we're not really worried about sheep. We're a lion. You know, it was very much that. Like, you have your little league where it's 3-on-3 and it's just one location and it's so limited players. And we have a national basketball league that is over, almost 200 players, and we have so much more logistics. And so I think it was necessary to kind of set the difference because it is different. It is different. It is a lot bigger, but I think it was very threatened. Like, I felt like she had to put her guard up. She had to put her fists up because,
Fair.
okay, everybody keeps coming for talking and comparing Unrivaled to us. We are on a different level. And I just thought that was really funny. But what Unrivaled has done is very much why we are having these CBA conversations. And I think it would be crazy to think that they are not linked. When we see so many people, thousands of people coming to Philadelphia, selling out Barclays in a couple weeks to come see these players, pay 3-on-3 basketball, a quick game, by the way, and they still want to just get a taste of the players and be able to be there in person. Yeah, you have to say that Nafisa's coming with those numbers and saying, we made $2 million in one day. You can't tell me you guys aren't making money. Like, that has to go hand in hand. And we've seen that throughout history. The ABL was one of those leagues that started at the exact same time as the WNBA. It was player focused. It was player led. The WNBA players were able to, in that CBA negotiation in 1999, they could say, hey, the ABL players are coming over here. They're expecting a lot more money. We want that money too. Like, they were getting $100,000. We're only getting $50,000. Like, can we get what they're getting? That is very much history repeating itself. And it's okay because we need each other to be able to balance it all out. Now, to your question about, do I think that's going to impact it? Reading through the latest summary of the CBA terms, them kind of moving up that day when they have to return to training camp to April 15th. We know that Project B is going into April. I don't think they had an end date yet, but that's something to keep in mind. I had a huge issue with the WNBA saying that you're going to be penalized with prioritization if you don't come in time, but you're not paying them. You're saying, hey, we're your side hustle, but don't come late from your main job. Now they're getting paid more, and I appreciate that. So I'm not upset with them saying, okay, you have to come report to training camp at this time, and maybe you have to leave a couple dollars on the table, but we're paying you more for that. And so I feel like there's a balance there that I appreciate.
Jordan, the other big thing that Nick and I had talked about that we were also floored about was, I think in May, right around when the season began, the reports began to kind of leak to the surface about the Connecticut Sun's future in Uncasville, Connecticut, which, we had seen them schedule games at the Garden in Boston. There were reports of the Celtics ownership group wanting to buy the franchise, move them into into Boston after the 2 games that they had there. And there was, and then much like, with the CBA negotiations, a lot of back and forth with Cathy saying, hey, there was never really a bid put out. We weren't looking at this market. Oh, so we're going to take the team out of Connecticut and move them down to Houston to bring back the Comets. But also with that, though, Jordan, we've got Portland this season. We've got Toronto coming this season. We've got Cleveland, Detroit, Philadelphia. Maybe your hometown's coming back sometime in 5 years. Who really knows, though, in Sacramento at Golden One. But that it's great, though, that we're seeing new markets or old markets come back after being dormant for so long, though, But Jordan, did the WNBA maybe mishandle this whole thing with the Suns' future by basically saying we're going to, private team out of Connecticut and put them in Houston, kind of against, the wishes of what that fan base might want?
This whole situation, you guys, has been so weird. Like
I could not agree more.
none of us can figure out what is going on. Like, it has been such a head scratcher of why this is even such a big deal, why the WNBA is so involved and not wanting it to go to Boston. It was a former president, I believe, of the Boston Celtics wanting to
Yes.
bring it on to Boston, but then really wanting it to go to Houston with the ownership there, but then also offering to pay $250 million from the league to own it so that they can put it wherever they want. So many question marks. And I just keep coming back to, I had Fran Harris on my podcast early last year. I don't even know what day it is, but sometime in a year ago. And Fran Harris is a former WNBA player, WNBA champion. She has been trying to build an ownership group to bring a WNBA team to Austin. And she has worked years, and she keeps saying that the league is passing on private owned people to be in bed with the NBA, to be able to have an NBA ownership group. That feels more legitimate in what it seems like to Cathy and the league. Being able to partner with NBA teams and that infrastructure already in place is something that we have seen over and over again. When you look at the Valkyries and their success in year one, it is unprecedented. It's never been done before. And I don't think that's an accident, because they have the Warriors already there. They have ownership that is already bought in, and we can see that. It's not something, I'm not saying that people in a private group aren't bought in. They totally are, but we don't have any receipts. Like, we can't already see that the fans are going to be there. But Golden State Warriors, we've seen that. Detroit Shock, we've seen that before. Cleveland, all of these are already NBA teams. And we saw that with even a former Boston Celtics. She's like, "Ooh, former? But if the current Boston Celtics team wants it, maybe." Like, it's been so obvious. Like, okay, you want that NBA title and that under that umbrella because it feels like it's so synonymous with success. I don't know if that's true. I feel like the Connecticut Sun have proven themselves that they have been able to, they started in Orlando, and being able to go to Connecticut and build that fan base. I also feel really bad for that fan base. If you uproot them and have to move them to Houston, of course we want the Comets back, but not at the Connecticut Sun fans' expense.
I mean, it's one of those weird things, kind of like what happened with Seattle and OKC in the NBA, and now they're talking about coming back to Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the place I want to take this next thought is the perception issue sometimes with people talking about the WNBA revenue. Callan and I have discussed this a ton about people who are saying, oh, well, the WNBA must be in the red and whatever. And some people just who don't watch the WNBA on a daily basis don't understand that it's a private league. They don't have to share their numbers.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to those people who try to say, oh, the WNBA is not making money, when we clearly don't know the full answer to that number?
I say, I said this on my show the other week when the news broke that the league did make a profit last year and that there was a revenue kick from 2025 season. And I said, what a sad day for all the people that keep saying that the WNBA doesn't make money. Now we have proof. We've always known. We felt it in our bones, but now we have proof. And that was not tied to revenue share. I want to add, that was from the previous CBA, where you had to hit a certain threshold of revenue to get a kickback. And that is exactly what happened. And all those players got a kickback because they reached that revenue number. And how amazing that came out during this time. And really, I bet, reignited the players to say, yeah, we're definitely holding firm, because we know that we're making money for this league and for everybody turning out. So, I mean, what do you say to ill-informed trolls? I think the WNBA fans and myself and everyone has just been having to take it because it just comes with it, covering women's sports for some reason. But I want to say that the WNBA is in year 30 and the NBA was still not making a profit when they were 30 years old. So you have to, the comparison to an NBA league that is almost 80 years in is insane. Like, that's not a fair comparison to a league with no other precedent, by the way. Like I said, other women's professional leagues started and failed. The WNBA is in uncharted waters and 30 years in as a women's pro league in America. So, yeah, I, I
So,
just, I,
and then also 1.4 million supermax, 300,000 minimum now. It's incredible what deal they got historically, just looking at the league. When you look at those numbers, does it just make you smile to see that they're finally making the proper six-figure money that they should be making now?
absolutely. These players deserve to be millionaires. And we know that there are a lot of them that are, but from off court endeavors because they are signed to Nike, because they have shoe deals, because they're in your commercial. But now it's because of the job that they're actually doing. And all of those things can still remain extra. I think that they deserve it more than anyone else. And no, it's not multi-million-dollar contracts yet, but it is such a great point to be in history and everything that they've done. So yes, it makes me smile ear to ear for sure.
Again, folks, Jordan Robinson joining us today here on Press Row on this Wednesday afternoon across the West Coast and East Coast. Obviously, Jordan, we're in the middle of March Madness. I don't think the game is in a better place right now, but I don't think people got the whole old friend of the program mentioned earlier. But of course, you and I know each other. We've known each other for over a decade when you were here at PLNU, Point Loma Nazarene, playing women's hoops for 4 years. Jordan, obviously, I think back a lot to the first year I got there and I began to do games for you guys, calling play-by-play during my time at the university. And I always think back to March Madness because of the opening year I was there. You guys go all the way to Anchorage, Alaska. You beat the number one ranked team in Division II women's basketball, on their home floor. It's freezing cold and whatnot. But Jordan, for those though who don't quite maybe get behind March Madness though, or that they watch though, but what's the experience like though as a player being a part of March Madness though, even at the D2 level as you guys were though, going all the way to Anchorage from San Diego?
Oh man, Callan, what a great memory to come back on. I had just talked about this the other day because I will never forget that game. I mean, I barely played. I was definitely a bench warmer, but the excitement of being in Alaska and the whole town coming to that game and like the buildings were shut down. We got back to our hotel room after that night and everyone was like, "We were there. We shut down. We were everything was closed because we wanted to see this game." And to be able to come in as the underdog, shock a whole town, a whole state, it felt like we were flying. But then we played the very next day and lost to someone in our conference. So it's so hard to just like ride that emotional high that I know these players in current March Madness are feeling. I always am impressed when someone can have a buzzer beater or have a monumental comeback and then come back a couple days and play steady. That is really, really hard to do. So much respect. But it was so much fun as a player to celebrate, jump up and down, be so proud of my teammates, and be able to make history in that way. It was incredible. So I'll never forget it. That was a long time ago, and I still remember it.
It's rent free for me. It's rent
Yes.
free.
Yes.
So I guess getting more into the tournament, seeing historical dominance, UCLA, South Carolina right now, just seeing how the tournament is. You predicted an all chalk Final Four.
I did.
Also,
Yes.
um, just looking at this, is this a sign of elite teams pulling away, or is the Cinderella era of women's hoops just getting started for the tournament?
There are never really Cinderellas in women's basketball, and we have like our first one this year in Virginia, and I am so excited. Virginia making it this far for the first time since 2000. They are the first team to make it from the first four, the play-in, to the Sweet 16 in women's hoops. That is just never done. We've seen over these past couple days the number one seeds, the top seeds just demolish their competition. When you get into conference play, the conferences are just different. The levels are different, and you start to see the separation in the tournament. But to have a team like Virginia just hanging around, being that annoying gnat, 2 overtime games, one game went into double overtime to be able to pull the upset over Iowa, which was a 2 seed. Just incredible. So now I'm rooting for the upset. I'm like, let's go, Virginia. They're going against a TCU in the Sweet 16, which just came off of an overtime game themselves. Olivia Miles is the best point guard in the WNBA draft upcoming, but they could get them. Like, they are a vulnerable team. So that makes it even more exciting. Now, if they would have made this whole run and then they would have had to play UConn, it was like, okay, this is over. You're done. But like, they could beat a TCU, and that makes it even more exciting. But this era of dominance, it's funny to kind of be back there because we were there for so long with UConn, winning undefeated seasons, and just like it was UConn, and no one really cared about the women's bracket because you just wrote UConn and you won. Now there is a little more parity. I want to see it go chalk because I mean, there could be some exciting things happen. UConn does look unbeatable again, and they could go back to back. But like UCLA versus Texas, again, I want to see that. I want to see South Carolina get some revenge on UConn for blowing them out in the championship game last year. I want to see what LSU does in the mix, what Michigan has to say. So there is a notion that women's basketball has been able to have some more parity because there is some upsets happening. There are some superstars scattered throughout and not just all the superstars on UConn's team. So I think that makes it a lot more fun. It's been so much fun to enjoy.
Yeah, that made me think of the time when UConn was on their dominance of, all these national writers saying, "Oh my goodness, they're so bad for the game of women's basketball," as you kind of said, though. UConn, 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 UConn. It's like, no, I mean, I think we're past that now, because sadly, portal NIL is now a thing, and that's kind
Yeah.
of why I think, the UConn, iron fist of ruling women's basketball, was, gone for over a decade until just this past year when they finally got back on top, though. But with South Carolina, LSU, Iowa's rise, USC's rise, with Juju Watkins, though she's been out for the past, year plus with the injury. But I think, though, parity now becoming, to the forefront of women's basketball is only going to get more eyeballs on the product. Jordan, before we let you go, though, where can people find you on the web? Where can they find the podcast? But also, where can they buy the book?
Yes, so many things. You can find me on Instagram at Jordan Liggins or on TikTok, Hey Jordan Robinson. You can find the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on YouTube, The Women's Hoop Show. And then you can get the book, Court Queens, a celebration of the history of women's basketball from the 1890s to today. You can find that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, wherever you get your books, or request it from your local bookstore, which a lot of people have been doing. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, Jordan, I enjoy the show. I've actually watched it quite a bit over the last couple months, and I enjoy the show.
Hey,
So,
thank you.
but you and Cheryl are great together too. So thank you. We enjoyed having you, and hopefully we can have you again sometime.
Yes, thanks so much, you guys. I appreciate it.